Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mr. Ali with The Real Story on ZMC TV network. Hope you're well and you're keeping safe just as we embark on a new academic year next week or already this week if your school calendar dictates that. On a really sad note, someone that was very close to me, someone that I looked up to, unfortunately, because of speeding, has lost his life. And the young perpetrator has been apprehended and arrested by the police, and still doesn't make it any easier for the victims as well and their families to sort of cope with that sudden loss as well. So that is something that I am going to be covering on my story both on a Tuesday and also next week here on a Thursday as well, about the speeding and why do people do it, and what we should do when we have no regard for the law and the sort of sentences that are in place. However, as always, I like to start off my show by talking about the latest COVID figures, and what you'll be interested to know is there has been a decrease of 180 in positive cases in Birmingham compared to the previous week, and so there are currently 3,494 cases compared to the week previous of 3,674. So they are on the way down. In terms of today's topic, it's all about the hasty withdrawal after 20 years of occupation by the military forces from the Western world, primarily the American forces, with President Biden hastily withdrawing his forces, and as a result, the Taliban able to take over and enter Afghanistan's capital, Kabul, within literally 4 or 5 days. And the amount of military hardware that has been now been left behind is attuned to $85 billion, which is just unbelievable. Includes Humvees, includes night vision goggles, includes Black Hawk Down helicopters as well, just to name some of them. And today, someone that was going to help me to talk about this topic is Abbas Ali Ghulam Abbas. So warm welcome to you to the studio of the ZMC TV network.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you for having me.
No problem at all. So for the last 2 weeks or so now, Abbas, we have been all glued to the TV stations and been looking at the rather embarrassing scenes, I would say, whereby the Western forces, including the British, the German, the French, have all been there. And they talked about initially trying to get rid of Al-Qaeda from there, which they were successful at. But then that mission creep soon entered. And then they were talking about, democracy. They were talking about women's rights, about, girls' education. And that seemed to have gone out of the window when President Trump and now President Biden have said that they are now going to withdraw and leave the Afghans to, deal with their own fate. So first of all, just a bit about your own thoughts about how President Biden has handled the withdrawal process.
Well, not very well, to be honest. And like you said, the narrative was very confusing. First, it was to defeat Al-Qaeda. Then it was regime change. Then it was nation building. Then it was social and civic rights of women's and minorities. Then he went back to supporting the government. Then he went back to nation building. And now, obviously, Biden said it wasn't about nation building. It was to support the government and obviously for them to manage the affairs of their own country. And it was this confusion now in the last 20 years, this narrative that has left people a lot confused and shocked and obviously afraid for the future.
Yeah, no, most definitely. And I think this is where it's almost like they didn't have a long-term vision or a strategy. They were just making it up as they were going along. And we do know that Afghanistan, in terms of its geopolitical location, in terms of countries like Iran, Russia, China, India, and Pakistan, is very strategically placed. It has enormous amount of energy and resources, and also these minerals such as lithium, which is used for these batteries and for a lot of phones. So it's not just a desert out in the middle of nowhere. It is highly strategic, and you can understand why the Western forces, especially America, were keen to have military and influential stronghold there.
Absolutely, yes. It was strategically located in a very um, fine place for the Americans. Obviously, you had the Russians to the north, you had the Chinese where they can keep an eye on the Chinese, and obviously the Pakistanis, the Iranians. So having their bases there was strategically very important for them. But unfortunately, they didn't factor in the Taliban, and they didn't factor in the locals. Obviously, Afghanistan has a huge and rich history. It's known as the graveyard of empires, and it's not been given that title for no reason. I mean, it's far back as Alexander the Great. You had the Mongol invasion, and then you had some of the Hindu rulers I was reading, and then obviously the British, the Soviets, and obviously now the Americans. No one has really managed to impact the locals, managed to change their hearts and obviously defeat them. And that was really the issue that the Americans had. Also, as you said, the natural resources, it's huge in natural resources. The Americans, they took they managed to take a lot of liberties with the heroin growth over there, and obviously, like you said, there's a lot of natural resources in terms of lithium, which is the new oil, and very expensive minerals, and obviously that's what they wanted to penetrate as well, and obviously oil as well, which unfortunately they haven't done so.
Yeah, well said, Abbas. And I think we sometimes forget or overlook that Afghanistan is a real melting pot of tribes, of different ethnicities, of different sort of Pashtuns, sort of, different sort of makeup. And, sometimes they do get on, sometimes they don't get on. There's a lot of warring factions there. And, they have their own way of sort of working. And for I think the Western world to think in naivety that they could go and impose democracy was a grave mistake. And a lot of countries have to be mature and ready enough and have to evolve for them and let them decide their own future, whether it is a democracy, whether it is a one ruler, whatever it may be. You have to support the infrastructure and take the people with you, as the British used to say, to win the hearts and the minds, rather than you trying to impose democracy. And even now, you had one of the Mujahideen son, I forget his name now, I think it's maybe Nasrullah, I think it is, if I remember right. He is still holding out and saying that we don't want to be under the Taliban. We want to be part of the government. We want to be in an inclusive government, not be ruled by the Taliban. So it's not going to be plain sailing for Taliban, but so far they have given a much more toned down rhetoric and narrative where they are saying we are going to fit with international norms. We are going to encourage women to be educated and not allow people to be, have their hand chopped just for, needlessly, and we're not going to take revenge. And they have demonstrated to some extent by allowing some of the prisoners to come out. However, words are cheap. We want that to be followed up by actions, and that's important, isn't it, Abbas?
Of course, definitely. I mean, like you said, there's a melting pot of different ethnicities. You have the Uzbeks, which cater for about 20% of the population. You have the Tajiks, you have the Pashtuns, which make up 50% of the population, and then you have the minorities, the Hazaras, the Shia Hazara minorities, which reside along the border with Iran. So there's a lot of melting pot of different ethnicities, and obviously we've seen after the Soviet-Afghan war that there was a very deadly civil war that ensued, and that's when the Americans left. That's when everybody left the Afghans to their own devices, and I think that was what American strategy was when they actually came in. That they were going to impose some kind of rule, and they believed that the best one was democracy, and and ruled by the people for the people. But unfortunately, democracy was as alien to Afghanistan as and the, and they felt that there's a lot of feudalism, there's a lot of warlordism, and obviously that was what they felt is the best way to rule by. So these kind of concepts like democracy and freedom was very alien to them, and as a result, it's not worked. And obviously, their 20-year plan has unfortunately been a damn squib. So yeah, now that the Taliban have power, that they've said that today or tomorrow they're going to set up a new form of government. One of the proposals is um, have a high down. Obviously, and they choose their leaders, the operation to run the country. Will the next few days really know what the Taliban.
Yeah, no, most definitely. And everyone's eyes and ears are on what happens over the next few days in Afghanistan, how they form the government, what sort of rhetoric do they come out with. And one of the key players in this whole situation is the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, who has for a while now has been saying there is no military solution to this. We have to sit down and negotiate and have a conversation with Taliban, and we have to support them. We have to encourage them. We need some support as well financially, because the amount of money and the amount of refugees that are coming on the border. But no one listened to him at the time. But he has certainly called it right, and he is on the right side of history when he comes to Afghanistan at the moment.
Yes, obviously, most certainly, Prime Minister Imran Khan, for the last 20 years, has stated that there needs to be a diplomatic solution as opposed to a military solution. Fortunately, the Americans, you could say, they had a hammer. And obviously, if you have a hammer, then every solution has to be a nail. And that's what they imposed with when it came to Afghanistan. But there had to be some kind of diplomacy, and I was quite amazed that the Americans actually didn't take advantage of that. And as a result, it's caused them. It's their longest war, and it probably will go down as their biggest defeat. There has to be some level of negotiation, some level of talks. And we know that the Taliban, as early as 2008, have been negotiating with regional powers and obviously the Americans themselves. We've seen the Doha agreement that has been signed, and obviously one of the fundamental issues on the Doha agreement was that the Taliban will not allow any organization or force to use their country as a platform against any others. They will not allow terrorism. So any groups like Al Qaeda, or obviously now we have ISIS, will not be formed or will not be tolerated. So and obviously there will be women's rights. There'll be rights for the minorities as well. So there's a lot of sound bites. The Taliban are saying all the right things, but again, Taliban are not to everybody's cup of tea. There's a lot of people that have concerns. There'll be a lot of worry as to what kind of regime and what kind of government the Taliban will form. It's very easy to fight and obviously come into power, but obviously that was just a starting block. Now, obviously, the real litmus test is how the Taliban form the government, and if they don't get it right, if they don't eliminate terrorism, if they don't satisfy the local people and bring about peace and prosperity, then even those powers that have supported them will be looking the other way. So there's a lot of pressure on the Taliban. There's a lot of expectations, and as you said, there is no alternative. In political spectrum, they use the phrase "Tina." There is no alternative. And in terms of Afghanistan, we have to work with the Taliban because that's all we've got. And whether the Americans, whether the regional powers or the European powers like it or not, that's the only form of government that we have at the moment. So they might not be to everybody's cup of tea, but we have to work with them. And I know that the Americans do have back channels that they are working with the Taliban, and obviously we'll see.
Yeah, well said. And we do know that CIA has been having these backdoor negotiations and conversations with the Taliban, and we also know that it is a vast, and it is very easy for groups or individuals to hide in some of the mountains and some of the rural areas. And even last week, ISIS-K, this new offshoot of ISIS, do not recognize the Taliban, and they do not recognize the government, and they're saying they will do everything in their power to jeopardize their governmentship, and they've already launched some missiles into Kabul airport as well. So unless the new Taliban government really get hold of the security situation there, it'll be very easy for the international community to launch either some drone attacks or some missiles, on the face of it, to destroy ISIS. But nonetheless, that will then delegitimize and undermine the Taliban government as well, because like last week, there was some counter reports that a drone strike wasn't a car full of terrorists with bombs. It was with 5 children that were killed. And as we know, that is the biggest recruiter of terrorism, is when you kill innocent children and women. That just goes against everything good that is happening.
Absolutely. The attack by ISIS-K was extremely tragic, extremely unfortunate. I think over 100 people now. They're saying that over 100 people have been killed in this attack. We know that 13 American soldiers have died, so there's been huge losses. And even though you can blame the Americans and the incompetence of the Americans, but really this has made the Taliban look bad. I mean, no matter how the Taliban present this, it really makes the Taliban look bad, and obviously it's taken the shine of their victory. And in order for the Taliban now to be taken seriously, they have to dismantle ISIS-K. It's imperative that they do that. It's imperative for their reputation. It's imperative for their support by the regional powers. Because if Afghanistan becomes another base for terrorism, then they will not get the support they need. I think China have said that they are willing to invest billions in Afghanistan. It will deter the Chinese. It will deter the Pakistanis, and the real threat is obviously the people. The people will start coming on the streets and will start to oppose the government. So there's huge expectations, and the Taliban have got a lot on their plate. This ISIS-K, unfortunately, has come out of nowhere. Obviously, before this attack, there were talks of ISIS-K, which means ISIS Khorasan, being formed in Afghanistan. Some say they are the old TTP, Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, but the Taliban have to work really hard to defeat this. And if they manage to curb terrorism and create a government of peace and prosperity, then maybe, just maybe, even powers like America and Europe will start recognizing them. So it's all to play for the Taliban. They have a lot to gain and lose.
Yeah, no, well, great sort of analysis and summary there, boss. We've got a couple of minutes left now. I'm just going to bring the conversation here to the role of the UK government. At that time, good old Boris Johnson, Mr. Dominic Raab was also on holiday, and there was little or no, reaching out to Imran Khan, to some of the Uzbekistan and Tajikistan countries, to Qatar, to find out what the situation was. And at that time, where the Taliban came into Kabul very quickly, a lot of the interpreters that helped the Allied forces there, a lot of the British nationals were left stranded, and a lot of people are still there, and hastily, we've seen now a number of chartered flights bringing in the British citizens and some of the Afghani nationals or interpreters, but the whole thing has been mishandled, and there's all been talks about whether we should. What right does Britain play in terms of bringing some of the interpreters and people that helped us during the 20 years to the UK, and whether we've got the resources or the space to accommodate these. Just want to get your thoughts on that aspect as well, Abbas.
Well, yes, absolutely. It was handled very poorly. I mean, recently we know that the intelligence services they told Dominic Raab, the defense secretary, that it's going to take about a year for the Taliban to come into power. But again, that's no excuses, because they were told by the Taliban that they have until 31st of August to evacuate all their bases and all their presence. So they had until then to evacuate everyone that helped them out, in terms of the interpreters and in terms of those Afghans, the families. So by not having a contingency plan, and this is obviously just, I mean, if you worked for the government and if anybody was worked for these institutions, they would know that you have, a plan A, plan B. You have many contingency plans, and for a government like the UK, like the Americans, which are huge powers and have huge resources and are extremely professional, for them to cut this up is really, there's no excuse. And obviously there has to be an inquiry, there has to be a commission, and obviously heads have to roll. It's simple as that. The amount of people that the Afghans were told, were promised that they were going to be held by the UK, are simply still in Afghanistan at the moment. So it's just not good enough. But on saying that, we should also praise the UK and praise the UK government and obviously the armed forces for the work that they did do. I think it was about 10,000 people. I'm not sure the exact number,
About right.
but I think that they did manage to evacuate a huge amount of people. And obviously they were fearful of their lives. Obviously the level of fear is a lot to be debated, but they did help the UK and obviously the UK forces. So I do believe that they did deserve help by the UK forces, and now that they are in the UK, so we shouldn't be too harsh. Obviously, it was a major cock up, but they did manage to evacuate at least 10,000 odd people. So they should be commended for that.
Yeah, no, thank you, Abbas. And just a sort of final touch on this is really, we spent the last, I would say, 20 years training up the Afghan army. We had President Ashraf Ghani, who was there ruling, and there's talks of corruption. As soon as there was a whiff of Taliban on the periphery, on the doorstep of Kabul, he was one of the first persons to run for it. Apparently, speculation says that, with cars and helicopters full of cash, which are unverified and unconfirmed reports, but that's not a good signal when your president is running away. But also the manner in which the armed forces of Afghanistan capitulated just shows either the training or the cause and the belief wasn't there in the army for them to lay down their lives. So just thoughts on that, please, Abbas.
Yeah, obviously we've seen President Ashraf Ghani. He has managed to escape to the UAE. Again, yes, I mean there's reports that he took $167 million with him in 4 cars filled. I mean, I find that narrative a bit hard to believe. I mean, if he did have 4 cars filled with cash, it would be very difficult for him to load that onto a plane. So they are unverified, and until we actually get full verification of that, I think that we should kind of leave that issue alone. But yes, it was extremely incompetent, extremely careless of the government to manage to fold like that. The Taliban did say that there was amnesty and they would not take revenge or arrest the government. So they should have at least stayed to at least negotiate with the Taliban, but to flee like that has left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. You have the Vice President Amrullah Saleh, who's now holed up in Panjshir Valley, which is surrounded by the Taliban. I think that he has now stated that he's the new de facto leader. But I think that's not going to happen. and obviously there's a few fighters in the Panjshir Valley. But yeah, it clearly shows that the planning, the strategy, and the execution was just not there, and the will to fight by the Afghan National Army and the Afghan government was just not there. And that's one of the reasons why the Taliban managed to take control in swift lightning force. So it just goes to show that something was very wrong, and the Americans now military are now starting to release certain evidences that they were told to actually spruce up this government and this power, especially the army. And even if they didn't pass, they were told to pass them anyway. I think what the Americans thought was that if they have about 300,000 trained Afghan fighters who know enough to fire a few rounds, I think they thought that quantity would defeat quality. But as we know, that's not really the case. And as a result, they capitulated as soon as the Americans went. So it just goes to show that they weren't the power that a lot of people thought, and what the Americans relied on.
Yeah, thank you, Abbas, for your time today. Really appreciate your insight. Just the final thoughts about your future hopes and aspirations for this new emerging country that's just emerging for the Afghani people, really.
Well, the biggest concern now is obviously the food shortage, the shortage of medical supplies. We know that in this hasty retreat, over 100,000 professional Afghanis have left the country, and that is really a lot of cause for concern, because a lot of the institutions now are empty. There's no people to man them. So the Taliban have to start from the bottom. We know that the banks have closed. There's massive queues outside the banks. The Afghani, which is the Afghanistan currency, is really depreciating. And right now, the short term, there's a real concern that there's going to be a humanitarian crisis. So the Taliban have to work with the aid agencies. They have to work with the NGOs and the charitable organizations. The Pakistanis have said that the troops in Spil Bolduc and in Dorkham, that they will keep open for 24 hours a day for goods and obviously food and aid to get into Afghanistan. But again, the Taliban really need to take control, and there's a lot of expectations, and obviously we're hoping and praying that they manage to overcome this short-term crisis that's unfolding.
Yeah, thank you, Abbas. Really appreciate you coming onto the Real Story on ZMC Network. God bless, look after yourselves, and hopefully we look forward to inviting you once more.
Inshallah. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
MashaAllah. That's fine. That was Abbas Ali, who provided a real insight into Afghanistan. I would like to also echo what Abbas was saying. My own thoughts and prayers are for the people of Afghanistan. I hope the future is much more brighter than the last 40 years that they've had. And it is much more peaceful. The prosperity is there. The human rights are protected, and they go on to become a beacon of countries for that area. So until next week, please look after yourselves and each other.